I'm Noah Bullock. I'm the executive director of Cristosal. We're a human rights organization that was founded in El Salvador, but operates now in 3 countries in Central America: El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras. We primarily focus on providing assistance to victims of violence and human rights violations. We do protection assistance, legal assistance and litigation. We have an investigative team, and we have a communications team. Is my most famous friend, I guess, at this point. She's won a human rights award. She's been named a prisoner of conscience, but even before that, at least in El Salvador, she was one of the most visible and credible voices criticizing the regime. The Bukele government began in 2019 with an election victory and has sustained sort of popular support for a long time. They've used that election victories and popularity to concentrate power and to co-opt democratic institutions, sort of supplant the democratic system of governance that put an end to the civil war in El Salvador with a new model of more authoritarian governance. A new model is maybe not the best way to say it, because it's really a return to the past, to the authoritarian governments of the past and sort of the patterns of power in which elite groups of families control the country and govern, with impunity, without restrictions, without transparency, and without dialogue. Our role in that context has been to try and resist that process of dictatorship in the country, and we did that primarily by accompanying victims of the abuses of power, challenging when we could still in the courts the dismantling of the democratic state, but mostly through developing evidentiary bases about mass human rights violations, arbitrary detentions, forced disappearances, torture and killings in prisons, but also investigating and documenting corruption that's natural as sort of part of the autocratic state. She and Cristosal led an anti-corruption unit that investigated acts of corruption by the regime and brought forward cases to the Attorney General's office. And she also, would spend her weekends doing workshops at churches and communities and different places around the country on transparency, democracy, corruption. Which is why when she was detained, it both generated an impact of fear, because people thought that if they could arrest Ruth, they could arrest anybody, but also generated sort of a mass response in defense of Ruth, because she, had those roots both in communities, but she was respected in academia. She's respected as an expert internationally, and so she's become an emblematic symbol of political prisoners in El Salvador. And I think that's important because outside of the country, people aren't aware that El Salvador is Latin America's newest autocracy, and in that autocracy, like in other autocracies, there are political prisoners. Criminalization or political persecution has multiple targets, and the first target is obviously the person and their activism, right? To try and silence that person and punish them. But also to destroy their image publicly, to discredit them, and by discrediting them, also the human rights movement more generally. Both the pain of imprisonment and she is incommunicado, like she's forcibly disappeared. We don't have contact with her anymore. That generates pain in the family and all of the people around her. But also the attempt to destroy her character. Awards like these affirm that she's in prison not because of a crime she committed, she hasn't committed one, but because of who she is as a human rights defender. And so those recognitions are powerful recognitions that no autocratic regime or mechanism of repression can destroy. In El Salvador, I think you could honestly say that we're coming close to talking about a regime that's totalitarian. There are very few spaces that the regime doesn't control in the political, civil, economic life of the country, cultural life of the country. But even with that level of control, there is resistance. And that resistance primarily comes out of people who have been direct victims of the regime, who, because their lives and freedoms, or those of their family members, depend on their advocacy continuing. And so that hope is what authoritarian regimes really just don't understand. In no moment in history has repression ever been able to turn out the light of people who are seeking justice, who are seeking freedom. That's not a guarantee that tomorrow everything will change, but we have a historical memory. The actions we take today contribute to a longer process of change, even if we don't see necessarily all the outcomes in our lifetimes. It's important to move forward. I think that's why human rights has always had such a close connection with the faith. Different in the business world, where like if there's no outcome in a certain time set, it's not worth doing. Human rights, we advocate for human rights, maybe because we'll never enjoy the results of it, but because there's a historic responsibility to continue to push forward a process of historic change.